In order to paint the pirate wood of this Chinese pavilion here, we will start with the caramel yellowish wood that could be something like Chinese cypress. If you look at references of these Chinese pavilions and gazebos, you will find that they are actually pretty colorful. One of the dominating color is red, and they also have really nice turquoise and yellow elements to them. We will start with this caramel yellowish looking wood tone. For this I use some P3 rucksack tan and moldy ochre. For the little bit variation I have also some darker tones. This is some Gun Corps brown and Umbral umber. And we also have some Men of White base and Morrow white for the highlights. The shading we will be doing with some Army Painter Strong Tone, some Games Workshop Citadel Brown ink, which is really rare these days, so if you want to have a substitute, go for the Winsor Newton Nut Brown instead. Also, to smuggle in some green variation, we will use some Vallejo Model Wash Dark Yellow, and also the dark brown will come in really handy. So I'm using quite a big brush here, that's a size 2 brush. You can also use the size 3 brush. It's important that you apply the color in a thick or like heavy base consistency. While you cover these planks up, you can also vary the tone a little bit. So don't paint all of them in the same yellow. Use some of the Gun Corps brown or the Umbral umber, bring in some variation. And also use a little bit brighter tone like the Men of White base to achieve this very bright yellow tone here. Once you're done applying one layer, you can use your hair blower to speed things up significantly. Alright, this is how it looks now after drying. You can see that I have also chosen to make these rails a little bit lighter. And the upmost part is also the lightest, so you will already have a little bit of a natural color variation that follows the zenithal light on the space here. Alright, here's a little example of a plank that I painted previously with 3 different tones. The main tone is the red one here, with all of these little crackly cracks in here. I will show you exactly how to achieve that. It's actually a really nice effect. These lower ones here have also been applied with the same technique, but also with some stippling. Okay, now it's time for some highlights. I mixed some more Men of White base into the mix and some Morrow white. And as you can see here on my thumb, I'm practicing these grain lines. This is actually the same technique as I have showed you with the Blood Bowl base. So if you want to see it again in depth, just maybe have a look again. I will send the link down here in the description also. Since the scale is actually quite big, it's I think it's a 75 millimeters, you will also have to produce some very consistent and rather long lines to paint these planks up. Something like this requires a brush that has a little bit longer bristles and also has a big reservoir, so it can give the color onto the surface with some more volume. You can also see the movement that I do here is quite significant. Try to make rather consistent straight lines and paint all of the surface without necessarily reaching the crevices of the wood. So kind of painting on the highlights on top of these areas here. For this beam we don't need to paint it up entirely because it will not be visible in the end. We will instead focus on these little significant areas like here where there is already some damage sculpted in. It's important to turn the piece upside down like that and then just draw your grain upwards. If you mess something up, you can use the gypsy brush and just remove the mistake really quickly. It's not a big problem. Right here we switch to a smaller brush. That's the miniature series size 1 from Winsor Newton. It will allow us to make these highlights way more detailed and more precise. So I just focusing the area in which I paint the highlight and just limit that a little bit, make it brighter towards the edge down there. Alright, not too much, this already looks quite good. So the next step will be to bring some more contrast and more shadow, so to say, into this whole mix. And also variation, so here we have some Troll Blood highlight, and with this we will differentiate these darker brown tones. Also here you can see that the topmost beam has been painted with the most attention, and also these damaged areas here, so don't paint everything up, there is really no need, you will cover it up anyways. Okay, some Armor Brown and some Vallejo Model Wash Dark Yellow will help us to bring in some variation. Also some of the dark brown will really give some just more tones into the whole mixture. The Umbral Umber we can also use to differentiate the different planks, so we will just increase the overall shadow in this in these planks here. We will apply these tones with the glazing technique, so it has to be rather diluted. Heavy glaze consistency, for example. Just put it down in these crevices here, not over the whole surface. Clean the brush and then use the brush to drag the water upwards, as you can see here. Remember not to fall into the highlight area too much, because that will just ruin the nice highlights that we have painted on here. Allow every aspect its own space. So the shadow has its own space, it goes around maybe a quarter of these planks. And then you have the midtones also, and then at the final quarter you just have the highlights, and everything has its place, so to say. Don't forget about these very deep crevices here too. This is where the planks should be the darkest. So just add some of that mix generously in there. And you can also repeat this process a couple of times to really get some depth into these crevices there. Also don't forget about these damages and these scratches that are sculpted in. In theory you can also just entirely paint these scratches and these damages on when you highlight them correctly, but since this is the lower part of this beam here, or of this column, it's important to also give it some shade and try to blend it in a little bit more into the whole beam structure there. Now I have mixed some dark yellow and dark brown of the model washes, and this gives some really cool green-brown shade, which we will apply onto these very bright planks here to give them just a little bit more variation and some just green into that, so more saturation. It looks so much more alive and nice. Again, don't go over the whole plank, just in the darker lower parts of it, and try to not touch the highlights with it. You can also apply it to these darker planks, which might be different wood, something like that. You know, a gazebo like this might have been built using different types of timber. Who knows? Or after over the time they have aged differently, so they will always have a little bit variation in them. You can also vary the glaze that you apply here. So in this case it's I think a little bit of the tank brown with some of the brown ink. It will result in an even darker glaze that we can do there. Okay, also on this top beam there, apply the glaze, and then you can also wash it down with your finger because the surface is just so big. It's not a problem. Alright, this is how it looks after it has had some time to dry. Now we will reapply some highlights. For this we take some Men of White base and Morrow White, mix it up together, and just start applying these finer highlights with a layering technique at the very edges and on places where more wear would occur onto these woods, so where people would usually walk or brush against. Again, the shorter bristled brush will help you to control your highlights even better, so switch onto a finer brush and just start to work finer and finer as you go. Alright, that should be about it. Okay, now the legendary brown ink. If you don't have it, don't worry, there are great substitutes like the Winsor Newton Nut Brown, for example, or Peat Brown. But if you happen to have some brown ink laying around, lucky you, it is really nice tone, and we will use it to apply it around the nails that are in this base, and also in the crevices of these planks to increase the contrast a little bit more. Around the nails it also looks a little bit like rust, so that is really ideal since these are made of iron. They would rust for sure. You can also apply it in extra deep crevices like this one here, but then make sure to dilute it a little bit, feather it upwards with some clean brush, and don't allow it to dry in there all too strong, so it will look like some coffee has been spilled on deck or something. And you can also see on this one beam I have added some of this ink also on the lower part, dabbled that on so it looks like some kind of dirt. Now comes the interesting part, the craquelure medium. So for this awesome craquelure effect, we would use the Marabu craquelure medium, which is just a one application effect. This craquelure is a really fine pattern of these dense cracks that form on surfaces of various materials, usually some old varnishes that have cracked over time. They really make some fantastic effect where the color that is underneath the top color is shining through. So this composition of different layers is really a interesting, visually very interesting effect. So we brush it on nearly purely with a big brush. That's again like a size 2 brush. Although the stuff is water soluble, I would just recommend brushing it on purely, as you can see here, more or less smoothly, and make sure that the further you go into the scratched off area, you just like stop applying it entirely, but just like rather dab it on in the islands. In order to work, you have to apply this effect quite thickly. It has to form a rather even surface, which will then make the overlaying paint to crackle. Just don't overdo it. If you see that it pools, you can remove it with a damp brush. And then it's very important that you use your hair blower to dry this whole effect up entirely before you apply the next color. So for the red lacquer, we are using a very bright red and also a slightly darker red in areas that are a little bit further down. So in this case, it's the Khador red base as the brighter red and the Scorn red from P3. You can see how thickly I apply the red lacquer or the red paint on top of that medium. I also try not to hit too many of these crevices, so I want to remain on the top layers of this wood grain, and I also try not to hit the very edges, because it will look so much better if we just leave them exposed. Here you can already see how this effect looks within a couple of seconds actually. It's really amazing. It's important to also blow dry that. Once this is dry or, well, still warm, you can use the gypsy brush and start to just scrub some of that green lacquer away again. This is important because the transition of the red lacquer and the wood is actually a little bit too strong by itself, so it's a great thing to just be able to remove it partially, as you can see here with the gypsy brush, and just scratch it off, just like sand it gently, not too strong because that would also remove the wooden texture from below. So use a lot of water to just remove all of these pigments that you don't want to have on there, and work your way through until you reach an effect that you're satisfied with. Okay, here you can see some of the structures that have occurred. It's really fantastic because painting that on entirely would take a lot of time and would not look as natural. So that is really an amazing effect, I think. Okay, to clean up what we have just rubbed off, we are mixing the same red tone and apply it with the stippling technique, a little bit thicker on the lower edge of this red lacquer here. So that's a medium to heavy base consistency. And you can see I gently stipple it on and hope that it will look a little bit more natural again. Sometimes you also need to have quite a lot of paint on your brush. If you go too fine, it will also look a little bit weird. So just add quite some paint on your brush and then add some of these flakes onto the surface. Also, if you're happy with the pattern, you can just add even more paint on top of that, so it will look something like this in the end. Okay, you can also add some some of the wooden grain highlights back on. That will increase the realism of this really worn out edge. So be careful and rather paint in dots again, stipple that on. Rather that than applying the color in lines, because that would look a little bit unrealistic. And for this step you can also use the Schmincke Titanium White, because it's thicker and therefore as the final highlight it's just an ideal color. Use the side of the brush to guide yourself upwards as you go up this beam here. Okay, now it's time for the black portion of the lacquer. In this case it's some coal black from P3 and some Tamar black. I've diluted this a little bit more than the red, and this resulted in quite a dramatic effect. Again with a size 2 brush. Here you can already see how it starts to crackle. Since the contrast is very high of the black and the yellow, this effect came out really nicely here. It's also a general rule of thumb: if you have a very bright undercoat, you apply something like a very dark lacquer on top, you will really see the results much better. Alright, and for the turquoise part we have mixed some Arcane Blue and Meridius Blue. It's just something in between these two, and some Gnarls Green also. But first we will start with this blue part, so same as before. We mix it together in a medium to light base consistency, and then we start to drag it on the upper grain structure here of the wooden beam. Try not to hit the highlighted area in the front, the one that you spend most time with, because everything underneath will be just covered, so just leave it out for now. Okay, after this I mixed some of the Gnarls Green into the mixture, because I wanted to have a little bit more turquoise effect actually on this whole roof, with also the blue still shining through. Could be that this beam has been painted over, for example, over the time, so it doesn't have to be just one color, it could be two or so. It looks so much more interesting in the end. Okay, again the effect in its full glory, looking really nice. Okay, here you can see I have left a little bit of the blue, and then I used again like the gypsy brush, made it wet and started to just rub it down. Try to remove a little bit of the uniform nature of this weathering. It's also good to sometimes just clean the brush again and then go back with some more water, so you will remove more of the pigments at the same time. Alright, and here you can see this exposed wood that is shining through. This effect is also achieved by just using the gypsy brush and starting to rub that red lacquer downwards a little bit. Just experiment a little bit with it, and I think you will reach a nice result. As the surface is also quite big, it is recommended to give it a little bit of highlight, so mix some white into your base mix, and then you can start to draw in some of this grain that maybe shines through this lacquer, make it a little bit brighter. Very similar to how we painted the wood grain in general. Paint it finer and finer until you are happy with the result. Also here, if you think that the surface is a little bit too boring, you can always get in there with some brighten up base tone and apply these little highlights underneath of some of these cracks. So that way you will make them stand out more and give some more detail to these random shards that you have there. Alright, and you see when we put in this pirate captain here, this is how it could look, the whole base. There are also a lot of accessories in these kits, so I think I've built this one from two of these Chinese pagoda kits, and it's really a lot of fun to just build something and place your miniatures in there to see how they would look. Alright, I hope you liked this tutorial, thank you very much. See you for the next one.